about it. So now we're at 10 o'clock and we're ready to go. And we're talking about cheese today, and we're going to do several things. First, let me ask, how many of you like cheese? Put your hands up. How many of you like cheese? Oh, quite a few of you. Let's see. What are some ways that you might be eating cheese? Think about that for a minute. How many of you like grilled cheese sandwiches? I do. That's pretty nice. How many of you like cheeseburgers? A bunch of you do. How many of you like macaroni and cheese? Macaroni and cheese. I mean, who doesn't like macaroni and cheese? Okay, what else can we talk about? Well, I'll bet you you like pizza. And here is a cheese. Let's get it. There we go. Let's get it straight. A mozzarella cheese pizza. I'm going to talk about mozzarella in a little while, but I don't think there are very many people that don't like pizza. It's one of those things that I like it, and my kids all like it, grandkids like it, but enough about pizza. And what else can we tell you about? Oh, how many of you like cheese curds? Do you know what cheese curds are? See these little guys? You can find them there. Sometimes they're white, sometimes they're yellow. And one of the features of a cheese curd is that when you eat it, it squeaks. Yes, it squeaks. I bet you didn't know that, or maybe you did. Maybe that's why you like cheese curds, because it squeaks when you bite into it. Well, what else? What other kinds of cheeses do we know about? Well, let's see. Here's one of the most popular ones. Let's see if we can get it so you can read it. It's cheddar cheese. Most people, when you ask them, most adults, you ask them, what are the kinds of cheese? Cheddar is one of the first that comes to mind. And that's pretty correct, because we've made, Wisconsin cheesemakers have made cheddar cheese for many years. So cheddar is certainly one of our very popular cheeses. And then I'll bet you that maybe you knew this, but maybe not. This is Colby cheese. Let's see if I can get it so you can, there you go. Colby cheese was invented, maybe develop's the better word, here in Wisconsin, up in northeastern Wisconsin, in a little community called Colby. So many years ago, they came up with a new kind of cheese, and they named it after their community, and it's Colby cheese. Very interesting. We have a second kind of cheese that's developed in Wisconsin as well. It's brick cheese, and that was developed by a cheesemaker in Dodge County. So two original cheeses from Wisconsin, Colby and brick. Well, what else can we talk about? I bet you know about these, huh? String cheese, it's called. It's mozzarella cheese, but it's made in a string fashion. You take this apart, you can pull it apart in strings. It's one of those fun cheeses to eat. It's also, as I had said a moment ago, it's the cheese that you find on pizzas. Mozzarella cheese. All right, what else have we got? Oh, this is the fun one. And I'm going to be talking about this later, because Mr. Yagi, the cheesemaker that I'm going to tell you about, he made Swiss cheese. And look at Swiss cheese. You know what makes it different? It's got holes in it. And why does it have holes in it? I'm not going to tell you now. After a while, I'm going to tell you how those holes got there. And so Swiss cheese is just a fun cheese. So, okay, enough of that. Did you know, you probably did, maybe not, but I'm going to tell you anyway, cheese, like milk, is good for you. Your folks probably told you that already. But both milk and cheese have all kinds of minerals, they have protein, and above all, they have calcium. And calcium is good for young people's bones, it's good for old people's bones, it's good for everybody. So don't anybody tell you that milk and cheese isn't good for you, because it is. Okay, in a little bit, I'm going to be telling you about Casper Yagi and his cheese making. But first, I want to say a word or two about how cheese is made, because lots of folks don't know that. So how is cheese made? Anyway, first off, I guess you know this, it's made from milk. Clearly, it's made from milk. Cheese is from milk. But you probably didn't know that it takes 10 pounds of milk to make 1 pound of cheese. 10 pounds of milk for 1 pound of cheese. Okay, let's. Well, how many of you remember this little nursery rhyme? Little Miss Muffet sat on her tuffet, eating her curds and whey. Along came a spider and sat down beside her and frightened Miss Muffet away. Okay, what was Miss Muffet doing when she was sitting on her tuffet? She was eating cheese. Because when cheese is made, you get two things. You get curds and whey. Whey is spelled W-H-E-Y. That you have to know that. And curds are made you can eat them straight away, as we said a moment ago. But curds also are pressed into cheese. So that's a very important part of the cheese making process. And whey, the W-H-E-Y, whey, today it is dried and it's made and it's used in all kinds of bakery products, cakes and cookies and all of that sort of thing. So curds and whey are the products of cheese making. Now, did you know that Wisconsin makes more cheese than any other state in the nation? It's true. And this has been so since 1910. It's a very long time. We have been first-rate cheesemakers for all of those many, many years. And you won't believe this. And it is hard to believe. But Wisconsin cheesemakers last year, they made 3.4 billion pounds of cheese. I mean, that's a lot of cheese. 3.4 billion, not million, not thousand, billion. 3.4 billion pounds of cheese. Now, one more question for you. I got another question, a couple of questions for you. But this first one, what do you think is the most popular cheese made in Wisconsin? And I'll give you a clue. Is it Colby? Is it Swiss? Is it mozzarella? Or is it cheddar? How many think it's cheddar? Hold up your hands. Not quite a few of you. How many think it's mozzarella? What about the others? Well, the winner is mozzarella. And why is that? Because we all like pizza, and mozzarella cheese goes onto pizzas all across this country and beyond. Okay, one other quiz question for you, and then we're going to read a little bit from the Casper Yagi book. How many different kinds of cheese do Wisconsin cheesemakers produce? How many different kinds of cheese do Wisconsin cheesemakers produce? And I'll give you some numbers. You think about it now. Is it 50 different kinds? Is it 100 different kinds? Is it 600 different kinds? What do you think? How many think it's 50 different kinds? That's quite a few. How many of you think it's 100? A few more. How many of you think it's 600? Nobody? That's the right answer. Wisconsin cheesemakers make 600 different kinds of cheese. Okay, now let's do a little bit of reading from the Casper Yagi book. Casper Yagi made Swiss cheese. And this is a picture of Mr. Yagi on the cover. And those are piles. Those are rounds of Swiss cheese stacked on shelves. And those rounds of Swiss cheese will weigh from 150 to 200 pounds. It's kind of interesting. So let me read a little bit from this book to give you a flavor of how Swiss cheese was made and what it was like to be a cheesemaker. We'll start by talking about Casper Yagi himself. America's Dairyland. Those two words on Wisconsin license plates tell you a lot about the state and its agricultural heritage. As you drive along country roads in Wisconsin, You'll see barns and cows grazing in fields nearby. Some of their milk becomes something you drink. Some of the milk is used to make cheese. So let me show you a picture. You've seen this picture with cows out in the field, and our license plate that says America's Dairyland on the bottom. Most of you have seen that, I'm sure. Many European immigrants, this means people who came from Europe, who settled in Wisconsin more than 100 years ago, brought their cheese-making traditions with them. One of them was Casper Jaggi, who came from Switzerland and moved to Greene County. Greene County is just south of Madison. Cities in Greene County are Monroe and New Glarus. And even today, Greene County is a major producer of cheese. Casper became an expert at making Swiss cheese, and he produced a lot of it. He eventually owned the largest Swiss cheese factory in Wisconsin in the 1950s. This is the story of an entrepreneur, I mean somebody who tried something new, who started a company doing something he loved. But cheese making was more than a business for Casper, it was an art. It also continued a family tradition. When he was a little boy, Casper learned about cheese making from his father. Casper later learned these skills, passed these skills on to his son, Fritz. When Fritz was a little boy, he helped, and I'll read a little bit about that in a bit, along with his dad in the cheese factory. By the way, I had a chance to interview Fritz Yagi for this book, so a lot of this is the story that as he told it to me. Casper Yagi is an example of the many immigrant cheesemakers who came to Wisconsin with special skills and contributed greatly to the state's agricultural history. He and others like him set the pace for the master cheesemakers in Wisconsin today. Casper Yagi was born in Europe on August 13th, 1893, in a place called Canton, Bern, Switzerland. Back then, Canton, Bern was well known for its cheese, especially Swiss cheese. Even today, Swiss cheese making is common in Canton, Bern. Casper was just 6 years old when his father started teaching him the many steps involved in making cheese. Each spring, when the snow melted in the highlands of the Swiss Alps, young Casper and his father drove their cattle into the mountains to graze on the lush pastures. How would you like to do that? How would you like to walk up into the mountains with some cows and your dad and spend the summer there? Well, that's what Casper did. He spent summers up there caring for the cows and making cheese from the milk. They had no electricity, and they worked by the light of a lantern or candlelight in the evenings. The water they needed came from streams and waterfalls. The Yagis burned wood or coal to heat the kettles used to make their Swiss cheese. When Casper was little, he had to stand on a tree stump. He was too short, so he could look into the cheese kettle. Well, let's go on with a little bit more about what it was like to be working in a cheese factory. And Casper Yagi passed a lot of what he knew on to his son, Fritz. Okay, let me find the right figure. Here we go. In early fall, winter winds and snow began threatening. That's when the Yagis drove their cattle back down to the valley where they spent the long winter. Casper and his father patiently waited for spring and the green grass, and then they could once more return their cattle to the high country. Casper's mother died when he was very young, leaving his father to raise him. Casper helped his father with the cows and with the cheese making for several years. His father taught him that Swiss cheese should taste like a green nut what's in the kettle. Later, when it was aged, it should taste like a ripe nut. As Casper grew older, he sharpened his skills as a cheesemaker. But Casper learned about cheesemaking one skill at a time. First, he was taught how important it was to have clean equipment. If his father thought he hadn't cleaned one thing properly, he'd make Casper start over and wash everything again. If you don't do a job right, don't do it at all. Don't do it at all, his father told him. Casper would never forget those words of advice. Casper was the youngest of four boys. His older brothers, Andrew and John, left Switzerland for the United States when Casper was a teenager. Andrew and John lived on farms in Greene County near New Glarus. This community is located about 20 miles southwest of Madison, and had been established in 1845 by a fellow named Nicholas Durst and another person, Fridolin Steiff, I think you'd pronounce it, from Canton, Glarus in Switzerland. So Durst and Steiff had come to southern Wisconsin in search of land for themselves and for other people from Switzerland. At the time, people living in Canton, Glarus were very poor and were looking for a place where they could make a better life. Durst and Steiff bought 1,280 acres near present-day New Glarus. This land would be shared by more than 100 other Swiss immigrants from their canton who would soon arrive. Then more people from other parts of Switzerland followed. Casper's brothers moved to New Glarus because Swiss settlers from their home in Canton had already immigrated there. Andrew and John knew they would be comfortable among people from their homeland. They all spoke the same language and shared many of the same traditions. By the time he was in his late teens, Casper wanted to follow his brothers to the United States. In 1913, when he was 20 years old, he moved and joined his brothers in New Glarus. All right, now let's go ahead and let me share a little bit about what it's like in a cheese factory, growing up in a cheese factory. Okay. And how many of you'd like to do this? How many would you like to get up at 4:30 every morning? Huh? That's what Casper had to do. He didn't have far to go to work when he made cheese at the Coldern Cheese Factory because he and his wife and their son Fritz lived above it. The living quarters included 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. How would you like to have a little apartment above a cheese factory? You wouldn't have to go far to get some cheese, that's for sure. Think what it would be like to be a young boy or girl growing up in a cheese factory. The rattle of milk cans, the rich smells of fresh milk and of cheese being made, the sound of quiet conversation among workers as they turned milk into cheese. It was an exciting place. This was Fritz's world when he was a boy. When Casper loaded a truck to haul cheese to market, his son, little Fritz, would put stones in his wagon to pretend he was delivering cheese too. But kids were expected to help out as they got older. Fritz began working in the cheese factory when he was just 6 or 7 years old. He was about the age Casper was when Casper started to learn cheese making from his father in Switzerland. Dumping cans of milk one after the other, day after day, doesn't sound very exciting, but interesting things happened in the cheese factory. For example, one farmer had been complaining to Casper that his milk's butterfat content was testing low. Milk, many of you know, of course, that milk has butterfat in it, and farmers were paid by a milk test that determined the amount of butterfat. So Casper asked the farmer, "Is your wife taking cream out of your milk cans to use for baking?" "Oh, no," the farmer answered. "She wouldn't do that." Fritz had noticed something of interest while dumping the milk from the farmer's cans into the cheese factory's scale tank. "Come inside for a moment," Fritz said to the farmer. "I want to show you something." The farmer walked into the factory intake room. "Does this coffee cup look familiar?" Fritz asked. "Would this coffee cup belong to your wife's china set?" "It came out of your milk can," Fritz said. "Your wife must be dipping in the can when she's skimming cream and it lost the cup to the bottom of the can." Oh, busted. She was caught doing something that would decrease the value of the milk because it had less butterfat. I want to switch now to a little bit about the holes in Swiss cheese, because I'm sure you were just sitting on the edge of your chair waiting for me to tell you about that. And let me show you the Swiss cheese again so you see what I'm talking about. I've got a piece of it right here. Okay, you see those holes? Good cheese has holes in it. You might say, my goodness, I'm buying cheese with holes in it, and if every hole it takes away, well, there's less cheese, but it's all holes. Well, let me tell you how the holes got in Swiss cheese. You know, that was a popular question. People would ask, now, how did that happen? And they'd get some strange answers. One answer was, well, you know, this is pretty simple. You make the cheese around the holes. You start out with a hole. Hope you do that. And then you make cheese around it. Well, that sounded pretty dumb, but that's what some people said. Somebody once joked that mice ate out the holes. That would be a lot of eating, wouldn't it? Because those Swiss cheese wheels weighed up to 200 pounds, I mentioned earlier. And a mouse to go in there and make all those holes? Well, that didn't happen. Actually, nothing or nobody put the holes in Swiss cheese. The holes were formed, they're called eyes too, formed naturally during the curing process. Remember, there's a special bacterial culture that Casper used that he added to the cheese while it was being made. And that bacterial culture causes carbon dioxide. And if you don't know what that is, ask your folks, they know about carbon dioxide. And when the carbon dioxide forms in the cheese, it makes the holes and when these little bubbles that are formed burst, then that's when you get the hole. Some holes are as small as a dime, some are as large as a quarter. But if Swiss cheese doesn't have holes, it's not Swiss cheese. It gets graded down. It does not receive the price that Swiss cheese with holes in would receive. All right, enough of holes in Swiss cheese, and let me talk just for a moment about what you might do now if I've whetted your appetite, and I mean that straight away, for more cheese. Here's a couple things you can do, which you might find interesting. I hope so anyway. Go to a grocery store, take along a pad of paper and a pencil, and go to the cheese display. And every grocery store in Wisconsin has a pretty big old cheese display, and write down the names of every different kind of cheese. You will be amazed, as I was when I first started doing this research, how many different kinds of cheeses there are. So you might do that. Just write down all the names of all the different cheeses. Another thing to do is to sort out those that are made in Wisconsin and those that are made some other place, because some of our cheese is imported from Switzerland, interestingly enough, and from other states, because we aren't the only state that makes cheese. So that's one thing you might do. Another thing, when summer comes and we get past all this virus stuff, the National Historic Cheesemaking Center is in Monroe. And there's a fantastic place to visit because they have all kinds of displays about cheese and how it is made. And then there are certain times where you can go there and you can actually watch them making cheese as a demonstration, which is kind of fun. And then another thing that you can do, several of the cheese making plants in Wisconsin offer tours where you can stop by and watch them making cheese. And you can find that out. Just go to your computer, go to Google, and click on Wisconsin Factory Cheese Tours. Wisconsin Cheese Factory Tours. And well, it's a fun thing for a family to do. Let's just put it that way. Many of these cheese factories also have cheese stores. So you can buy at the cheese store the product that they make. So that's my story about cheese. And I hope I've helped you understand that cheese is a wonderful food, as is milk. And I hope after you listen to this and watch what I've been talking about, that you might have a new interest in trying different kinds of cheese. And you can try different kinds of pizza too, as far as that goes. So let me end by saying, stay well, drink more milk, eat more cheese, and above all, have fun.